instruction of your word. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Esther chapter 1, looking at these first 8-ish to 9-ish verses. So last week we read through the whole book, and that was, well, except for the end of chapter 9 and 10. But we did read through most of the book. And we read through this kind of Cinderella-style story, right, where Esther, how would you describe her? Beautiful.
Stunning.
Brave. Yeah, she has courage and bravery. And does she have parents?
No.
She's raised by her cousin Mordecai. Yep, her cousin Mordecai. And how about Mordecai? How would you describe it? Yeah, Grant.
Put your microphone on.
I don't have one.
It's behind you.
But we've got the Mordecai. And how would you describe him? Cunning?
Cunning, yeah.
Yes. What's that? Someone defiant against who? The authorities. You know, it's interesting. He's not necessarily defiant against Haman. He's defiant against the king. Yes, the king has commanded people to bow down to Haman. And is that like a bow down of worship? No, it's not like the bowing down of worship in Daniel's situation. This is to pay homage to a government official. And Haman and Mordecai won't do it. How does that make Haman feel?
Angry.
Yes, he is furious with Mordecai alone. No?
The Jews.
Yes. He is not content to hate Mordecai alone, right? He wants to destroy Mordecai and the people of Mordecai, it describes. So he is furious not just with the man, but the people of the man. So Haman's got some issues. Anything interesting that you guys learned from last week? Adam, do you want to run the live stream?
Sorry, yeah.
Kara would love for you to have that.
So, all right. For the people who couldn't make it.
I was mixed up. It's Haman that's coming. Yeah. Not Mordecai.
Yeah, okay. So here we go. We've got all these characters. Anyone remember or think of anything that was interesting from last week? Maybe there wasn't anything interesting, but anything. Yes. Anyone find that bizarre? The name of God is not mentioned once in the book of Esther. And do you think that's on purpose? Yes, it's intentional by the author to help us see that even in the midst of our troubles and trials, when it appears that God is not present, he actually is. And so this is a book about the providential care of God. Well, let's take a look at these first 9 verses, but before we do, I'll try and paint a little bit of history, because throughout the centuries and across the world, what has been the way to signal to the world a nation's power and dominance? What is the thing that a nation will use to promote its power? Usually through some type of political or military might, right? The political and military might is what's going to demonstrate that this is a powerful nation. And they do that by taking captive people. And God's people have really been like a political football, or maybe ping pong ball would be even better, throughout the centuries. We are reading we're studying in the sermon series about God's deliverance of his people out of Egypt. And so that was probably the first captivity. And then you've got the Assyrian captivity after that, where the Assyrians captured or dispersed really the 10 northern tribes and dispersed them across their domain. And then next is the Babylonian captivity, which then basically sacks Jerusalem and then takes Judah captive for how long? 70 years. It rhymes with 70 years. 70 years, yes, good guess. So that's the Babylonian captivity. And then after that comes the Persian Empire. And the Persians take over Babylon, and then after that it's the Greeks and then the Romans. In Jesus' day, it's the Romans. So we got to back up to the Persian Empire. That's the time period we're dealing with in Esther. And so if you want to consider like chronology in this order of our Bibles, you've got like Daniel taking place, which is a little odd because in our Bibles, Daniel's like kind of toward the end of the Old Testament. But the events of Daniel are before Esther, even though in our Bibles it's not in that order. So you got Daniel, because that's the Babylonian captivity, Nebuchadnezzar. Then you get the Persians that take over, and King Cyrus in 539 takes over the Babylonians. And then in 538, he lets the Jews return to Jerusalem to begin rebuilding their temple. And so you can read about that with Zerubbabel and Ezra. And so then you get Ezra, the first wave to rebuild the temple. And then halfway through the book of Ezra, you get the second wave with Ezra. And then you get to Nehemiah. The events of Esther take place like in the middle of the book of Ezra. Okay, so if you're following that timeline or that period, we're talking about 483 BC. Okay, so 4 centuries before Jesus. All right, so it's after the 70-year Babylonian captivity, and so this is all taking place during the Persian Empire. This is the same time that Pythagoras is on the scene in Greece. And every well-known and loving mathematician knows Pythagorean's theorem, right? How would we know the hypotenuse of a right triangle without Pythagoras, right? So he's the Greek mathematician. Yeah, you know, the hypotenuse squared is equal to the other side's squared, the sum of them. If you want the hypotenuse, you take the square of that. We love that stuff. So anyway, that's the era. It's kind of neat to think that Pythagoras, the Greek, was probably against Ahasuerus, the Persian. But anyway, all right. So let's get into the details of these first 9 verses. So if you're thinking about what's happening, are the Jews allowed to return to Jerusalem? So it's not necessarily like a shackles kind of captivity. A lot of the Jews did return. But Esther and Mordecai and a whole host of other Jews decided not to return. They decided to remain in Susa, the Persian Empire. They just decided to. So they're kind of Persianized Jews. And so I think it's helpful to realize that they don't have their own land, they don't have their own army, they don't have a temple, they don't have sacrifices, they don't have a priest there, they don't have public worship. They're just kind of hanging out outside of Jerusalem. And they could have returned, but they don't. So they stay there. They're a completely defenseless minority against this ruthless monarchy, Ahasuerus. And so the big question is God working among his people even when you can't see him? Even when it appears that he's absent? We know the answer to that. What do you think it is? Yes, the answer is yes. Well, let's take a look at the first 9 verses of chapter 1. Now, in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus, who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast to all of his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days, in the feast of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff of the palace to do as each man desired. And Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. All right, let's stop here. This is a narrative. You can tell this is a story of real events, real people, real time, and it's skillfully written to reveal some truths. And the author's a master of suspense. And so in this drama is like a soap opera. You got these powerful men, beautiful women, the danger of death, the suspense and the risk of life, an oppressive king, and this battle for power and control. And that introduces to us the king. Who is the king? Ahasuerus, yes. I've titled this lesson, Ahasuerus is king? Don't miss the question mark. Okay? King Ahasuerus is in control like that. The beginning of this is designed to tell us who's in control. King Ahasuerus. Everyone knows he's the master of the land. That's what this is designed to tell us. He really rose to power following a succession of his father and grandfather. And so the Persian Empire has been in control for a little bit of time from the Babylonians. But he reigned beginning at the age of 32, and he reigned for about 23 years, and then he was assassinated. And so from his reign onward, he was trying to send an impression that he is the world ruler. That's what he's desiring to do. Now, how would you describe this party that he throws? Lavish, yeah. It's amazing. Long, 6 months, 180 days, 6 months. It's like crazy. Very extravagant. He's got all these resources, and he's showing it off, right? He's not hiding this stuff. Now, the question I think we should ask is, why did he throw such a huge party? Does anybody know? So, okay, this will be interesting then. I'm glad that no one spoke up because I was hoping I could tell you this. Because it says that he's got this huge domain in verse 1, right? Look at verse 1. It says that this is the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia. He's got this huge empire from the eastern Mediterranean all the way through Turkey, including Egypt, Ethiopia. And then how many provinces does it say? 127. The author is just magnifying the grandiose domain, right? If you were going to talk about how great America is, you could say America, the one nation. I mean, that doesn't sound so impressive, but you could say the 50 states, right? I mean, you could say something like that. You could say 3,000 counties, right? I mean, you could, whatever subject, whatever unit you pick makes it sound cooler, right? Over 100,000 cities. I mean, then that's what they're doing here. That's what the author's trying to make it sound so grandiose, that this Ahasuerus is powerful, the big dog, right? He's the head honcho. You don't mess with. Everyone answers to Ahasuerus. No one questions Ahasuerus. That's what this is designed to communicate. Now, what's interesting, though, is that 6 years earlier, his dad, his pops, his old man, Darius, he was king of Persia. He dominated the entire Middle East, okay? And so, by the way, where is this taking place? It says it in verse 2, right? Yeah, when he sat on his royal throne, where? In Susa. That's the capital of the Persian Empire. It's misleading to say the capital, because there's 4 capitals in the Persian Empire. That's how huge this is. There's 4 capital cities, and Susa is one of them. I've read that it's probably the winter residence, because the summers would have been unbearable. This is like modern-day Iran. And so if you were king and you had multiple capitals, you'd go to where it was best in the climate whenever. So that's where he is. So Darius dominated this Middle Eastern empire, but there's some big blunder that he couldn't achieve. Darius could not conquer the Greeks. In fact, Darius 6 years earlier was embarrassingly defeated by the Greeks at the Battle of Marathon. If you're familiar with the marathon, that's where the guy ran back to warn the troops. He ran 26 miles, and that's where we get our distance for a modern-day marathon. Anyway, so this is the setting of which Ahasuerus steps onto the scene. He rises to power, and what does he want to do? He wants to get vengeance for his old man. You see? Because Daddy Darius, that's how I remember his name. You can always remember Darius is the dad. He's Daddy Darius. He lost to the Greeks. Ahasuerus steps on the scene, and he wants vengeance for his pops. You got it? So, what does he need to do? His whole army is embarrassed, right? So he needs to secure their allegiance. He's trying to plan a military invasion to Greece again. And what is the army thinking? Look, Ahasuerus, we've been down this road. We lost. This is not what we signed up for. Your domain's huge, brother. This is awesome stuff. We don't need Greece, okay? But Ahasuerus is hungry for the victory. He wants to secure his position as the most powerful ruler on earth. That's who he is. That's who we're dealing with. And so, if we look at verse 3, you'll see that's why these people are listed. He waits 3 years in his reign. It says in the third year of his reign, so about 483 BC, he gave a feast, and this isn't just a feast for like slaves and stuff, it's a feast for his officials and servants. And then look at this, the what of Persia and Media? The army, yes, the army of Persia and Media, and the nobles and governors of the provinces. And he's showing off all this royalty and glory and pomp, and he's showing off. And the point is, he's planning the invasion. He's trying to muster military support to go into Greece again, win that vengeance for his father who couldn't do it. So he's rallying the troops, and these folks have already been defeated. So with all this glory and all this pomp and all this splendor, he's really trying to show them and convince his army that success is secure. Look at all these resources I have. The military is in a much better place than in the days of Darius. What Darius couldn't achieve, Ahasuerus can. Come to my party. Look at all the resources of the Persian Empire. I've got all these military resources. We can conquer Greece. And not only that, I have the resources, the generous resources, to reward those who are loyal to my cause. Do you see? Do you see what he's doing? This is a manipulative party. It's a manipulative 6 months. He's really trying to gain the military support of his formerly defeated army so he can go into Greece and win the vengeance from his father's defeat. And what better way to gain the loyalty than to showboat? Right? To flaunt all the riches that you've got, all the resources you have. Isn't that exactly what militaries do? Right? They flaunt their big battleships and the latest artillery and the greatest airplanes that the money can buy. And this is what he's doing, but on like this level to impress the army and the governors and the nobles. All these folks are there. So in his effort to be desperate, to secure this position. He's like a peacock with the feathers. He's like, look at all this stuff that I've got. I can reward you if you're loyal to me. So, are the people impressed? Well, let's look at verse 5. It says in verse 5, and when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, this is the capital, both great and small, everybody, a feast lasting 7 days. So this is a smaller feast, and it's shorter, but it's for the residents in the capital. And this is really intimate because they're invited into the king's garden, the court of the king's garden. And verse 6 says, there were all this amazing stuff, white curtains and violet hangings fastened on the cords, as marble pillars and couches of gold. We mentioned that last. I mean, bougie, right? I mean, this is crazy. Uncomfortable gold couches and silver couches. Who would even want to sit on that? He's definitely showing off. And so that's all he wants to do is show how generous he is. The goal is to demonstrate that the Persian Empire is at his disposal to reward those who are loyal to him. It's probably working. Now, Herodotus, have you heard of Herodotus? He's a historian, and he's not a biblical figure. But what's great about some of the history that we have of this day is that Herodotus records the history of Darius and Cyrus and on to Ahasuerus, or in his Greek name, Xerxes. And so if you hear Xerxes, that is Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus is his Persian name. Xerxes is his Greek name. So when you're reading history, like secular history, you'll read about Xerxes. And Herodotus describes and characterizes Ahasuerus in these three dimensions. Let me read them to you. As an ambitious, ruthless ruler. He's kind of, well, you can make for that what you want. Ambitious, ruthless ruler. Secondly, a brilliant warrior. And we're already seeing the brilliance of his strategies, right? This is a brilliant strategy. And thirdly, he's a jealous lover. That's how Herodotus describes him. We'll take his word for it. I would add that he is an irrational monster. This guy he has an irrational temper. Just to give you an example, when he decided to go to attack Greece, he sends his huge, massive army westward to the western frontier of his empire, which is Turkey. When you get to the edge of Turkey, wait a minute, I gotta do it this way for you guys. When you get to the edge of Turkey on the western frontier, you got Greece over here, and that's where he wants to go. But there's this channel of water that's messing things up. It's right at Hellespont. You've got this channel that separates Europe from Asia. And so this water channel is what carries the Black Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, so I don't have a map. You got to follow the imagination here, okay? Black Sea, Mediterranean Sea, this channel of water, Hellespont right here, Turkey, Greece. He's sending the army this way. When they get to this, they can't cross the water. The channel's huge. So he gets these engineers to build a bridge. A storm breaks out and breaks the bridges before his army can get to Greece. Ahasuerus is furious. So he gathers the engineers and beheads them all. You know, it's a shame that engineers get the bad rap. I'm just saying. But they get the bad rap. He beheads them all. This guy's a monster. The irrational part comes next. He orders the soldiers to take whips and to whip the water. 300 lashes because of the storm for breaking the bridges. Then he orders the soldiers to take iron spears and to heat them up red hot and stab the waves. And I think Kamala Harris is crazy. And she probably is, but this guy is totally crazy. You're getting the idea of how irrational. That's why Esther said, when Mordecai says, look, you in chapter 4, you just have to go to the king and tell him that you're a Jew. It's time. Go tell him. And she said, it's been 30 days. He hasn't called me. And there's one law. Ain't nobody going to the king if he or she ain't summoned. You're tripping. I'm not going. Right? And that's because she knows that he is an irrational, crazy person. Whipping the water? Stabbing waves? This guy, he's got an ego complex and he's just irrational at times. So, just to summarize, he wants to conquer Greece. He's trying to gain military support, so he's showboating all of his riches so that he can reward people if they're loyal to him. That's the opening act. But why does the author bother to tell us this? You see, the irony of all of this is lost on us because we're not the original readers. If you were the original readers, you would know that 4 years after this feast, Ahasuerus came back from Hellespont. He never made it into Greece. Came back totally defeated and depleted of all royal wealth. Isn't that interesting? So if you're an original reader, you're reading this kind of like a comedy satire. And does this make sense? You see, if you're an original reader, you're like, well, the author could have announced and introduced Ahasuerus as, in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who was defeated at the Battle of Hellespont and lost all of his money. But instead, the author says, no. In the days of Ahasuerus, he threw this huge party. And he had all these riches. And he thought he was this is it. He thought, and everybody thought, that he was the big dog. But he was defeated 4 years later. You see, the author is introducing to us, right at the very beginning, the biblical concept of reversal. Reversal. That is one of the key themes in this book. You guys probably know, as we were reading through this last week, that there was all this reversal taking place. In fact, why don't we turn to chapter 9, and I'll show you guys this key verse that we saw last time. Because while the author could have introduced Ahasuerus as the defeated king who couldn't take over the Greeks, he's introduced as this splendor and optimism and power. He rules. But it's all to show this reversal that takes place. How many times is Jehovah mentioned in the book of Esther? 0. How many times is Ahasuerus mentioned in the book of Esther? Over 175 times. What do you think the author is trying to communicate to us? That this idea of his optimism and power is really nothing at all. No matter how loud and boastful he is, he's not really the one who's in control. The entire thing is designed to illustrate God's active providence in the events of the world and in the events of our lives. Even when he's not seen. Even when it's his invisible hand. And that's what this is designed to show us, is that beneath the surface of all of Ahasuerus' pomp is an unseen and uncontrollable power, the divine omnipotence of God. That's it. The unseen power that's controlling these events for his purposes is the divine God of the universe. And that's what this is designed to show us. This book, actually this opening act, is designed to tell us what Daniel chapter 2, verse 21 tells us, that God removes kings and sets up kings. It's designed to teach us what Daniel 4, verse 17 says, that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. So behind this crazy feast is really the unseen power of God. You guys are welcome. I grabbed the clock before I forget. So did you guys turn to chapter 9? You see, so this passage is designed to introduce to us the biblical concept of what? Reversal. Yeah, and that's important because the author wants us to read this book from the future. We're supposed to read it from the future. We're supposed to be impressed with Ahasuerus, but at the same time, we're supposed to know that his power is fake news. That's what this is designed to. It's written that way so that we would read about this. It's kind of like, could you think of any type of big sport event that's going to take place, or a one that you know of where it's totally upset and totally reversed? And maybe there's a documentary about how these guys thought they were going to win, and they didn't practice the week before, and you know, and in hindsight, you read the story, and it's like, man, what a huge mistake. They thought they were the top dogs, but not really. You see, that's how we're designed to read this. We're supposed to be impressed, but we're supposed to know that it's all fake power because he's lost. And that's the irony. Think of these two banquets, by the way, that were described, right? Ahasuerus had that big, fancy feast that was eight verses. And then in verse 9 of chapter 1 said, and Vashti threw a party too. In the king's palace, right? And so that's just this sharp contrast and reversal. Think of some other reversals. How the king is politically powerful, but domestically, he's incompetent, right? Like him and his wife, Vashti, they're like not even working things out. Think about how Vashti is rejected for failing to appear when called. But Esther, on the other hand, is accepted when she's not called. Isn't that interesting? How about another reversal? I mean, the most obvious is between Mordecai and Haman, right? Mordecai takes Haman's house. Mordecai, or maybe I should say the other way around. Haman's house is reversed with Mordecai's. Haman's job is reversed with Mordecai's. Haman's honor is reversed with Mordecai's. Haman's life is reversed with Mordecai's. Haman is hanged on the gallows designed and built for Mordecai, right? And the whole event is reversed. And that's what chapter 9, did you guys turn there? Chapter 9, verse 1, look at this. At the second half of the verse, on the very day, do you see that? When the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the what occurred? The reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. Who did that? Who caused that reversal? Who worked all things together for this reversal to take place? But he's not mentioned. Right? Do you remember last week I read through all the happenings? Oh, this just happened to happen. This just happened to happen. The king just happened to not be able to sleep. The book just happened to fall open to when Mordecai had rescued his life, the king's life, right? And he just happened to not be rewarded yet. And all these things that took place just by chance. Right? And I told you guys, I warned you, don't be duped into our world's view of chance and luck and good fortune and coincidence. It's God's providence at work in the affairs of this world and in the affairs of your life. So this book, the whole thing, picks up on this biblical concept of reversal. It's actually the gospel pattern of reversal. Isn't that it? That our King, our promised Messiah, descended from heaven in an incarnation and then descended into a death on a cross. But then the reverse happened, and he conquered death and rose in life and ascended into heaven. That's the gospel reversal. This gospel reversal that's been promised since Genesis 3:15. And this book is a picture of this gospel-themed reversal. And it's to reveal that God's providence will bring salvation to his people and judgment on his enemies. And that's exactly what we see here. So whatever the circumstances, God is the one who's providentially protecting his people and judging his enemies. In fact, there's a verse, chapter 4. Let's turn to chapter 4, and I'll show you this again, because we should be understanding as we read through the whole passage every week as we digest a new passage, we should be thinking about how God's providential protection is basic to the narrative. Look at chapter 4, verse 14. This is where Mordecai says to Esther, "For if you keep silent at this time," this is when he's encouraging Esther to tell the king that she's a Jew and to ask him to protect the other Jews. "If you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance are hopeless." What does he say? They will rise for the Jews from another place. God's providential protection is inevitable. Whether you do it or not, it will. But he's using this to encourage her for her bravery and her courage to approach the king. Let's stop here, and I'll just ask, how do you feel now reading this in light of Ahasuerus' defeat? Do you read verses 1 through 8 differently? Maybe the whole story differently. Do you feel any different knowing that this is all designed to boast of his pomp, but we know that it was just, he was defeated 4 years later? I think there's a couple things that we could learn. One thing is that we really should not take the power and the glory of this world too seriously. I mean, that's kind of obvious to me. All this power, all this control, all this boasting of Ahasuerus, it's real and it's painful to see ruthless, oppressive systems that seem to have the ascendancy But we really shouldn't be taking the power and the glory and the glitter of this world too serious. Our world, our society loves to exalt the trivial. The trivial is all over the place. Grown men are getting paid crazy amounts of money to hit and throw a ball. Other grown men are getting high blood pressure from watching those men throw and hit a ball. People boast of their possessions and their status and their cars or their houses and storing up treasures on earth. And it's glitter. You guys know that this is just glittery stuff. And that's where Ahasuerus, what will it profit a man to throw a 6-month party? Nothing. The defeat 4 years later. That's the baseline of the story that introduces the setting for the king. I mean, how much more ridiculous are we? Consumed by our treasures, our possessions, status, prestige. So the first thing, let's not take this glitter of the world too seriously. The second thing I think we should learn here is that the ultimate destiny of God's people are secure in the promises of Jesus Christ. You can say, Adam, where's that in this? Well, let me try and help, because this narrative exemplifies the structure of the gospel reversal, like I was telling you before. And it's the same gospel reversal since Genesis 3:15. Even when the political powers of the world empire seem to have the ascendancy, even when God's people seem to be defeated, God is faithful to save his people and judge his enemies. This is the whole Bible story. We should begin reading our Bibles backward. Start in Revelation. You'll know the story. This is exactly how the author's intending us to read the story. From the future. You might be wondering, how is it that God could be in control of the world's events when wicked, evil people like Haman are put into political positions of influence? Has anyone ever wondered that? How is it that God could be sovereignly and providentially in control when there are Hitlers in the world and Putin's in the world? Well, we have to understand that our world is in rebellion against God. But God is faithful to his promises to fulfill his blessings to his people and to fulfill his judgment on his enemies. And there will be a day of reckoning when all wrongs are righted. And the balance will be set. Even in those moments of trouble, when there's no visible display of, what did we call it, exodonious intervention of God. You know, we're reading in Exodus, right? There's this lightning bolt fashion of divine intervention. That's obvious that God is intervening. All the plagues and the miracles and the pillar of fire and cloud, the manna that miraculously happens. Well, it's probably not as difficult to trust God when those visible manifestations of miracles are happening before you. But what about when it appears that he's not there? And the book of Esther is there to tell us of the reality of God, even when it appears that he's absent. Because God is faithful to his promises. Do you think that the power of Persia can frustrate God's plans? Oh, come on, that's an easy one. No. Do you think that the power of America can frustrate God's plans? Do you think that the opulent military bravado of the entire world can disrupt or frustrate God? No. It's entirely powerless. We know from Psalm 2 that even the greatest and the mightiest kings set themselves up against the Lord and his anointed. But verse 4 of that psalm says that he who sits in the heavens, what does he do? And I think that's how we should be reading some of these events. I mean, not in a type of escapism, but in a realization that the unseen power of this world is God. So, we even know from the book of Revelation in chapter 18 that the whole world empire system, all of Babylon, will be reversed in 1 hour. 1 hour! It doesn't even take 4 years, like we've seen here. So, don't take the power, glory, and glitter of this world too seriously. The ultimate destiny of God's people is secure. And the third thing I think we can read from this book is to be comforted by God's sovereign power and his control over the events of life. I mean, these guys are living in the capital city of Susa, and they're strangers in their world. We're strangers in our world. We're citizens of a different country, a better country. We are subjects of a better king. And so it's things that we should be looking at to see, well, they struggled with the invisibility of God. Who here struggles with the invisibility of God? Yeah. So let me encourage you, look back on your life. And God's providence in our lives is something that we don't see until hindsight. And that's how we'll be looking at this book as well. Be looking at it in hindsight. Is God at work then? The big question that I asked at the beginning, is God at work then among his people even when he's unseen? Yes. Yes, obviously. So let's take comfort in that. Well, what are your guys' thoughts? Or questions or comments? I really wanted to introduce where the book begins, because a lot of this material you won't find in the scripture. You've got to go to the historical setting to see what's happening. Yeah, Sue.
Thinking what you said earlier, how the Jews that were living there weren't able to practice their faith in public, like sacrifices and all that. And I'm just curious and wondering how Mordecai could have kept such a strong faith in a God that he wasn't allowed, that they weren't allowed to gather together as a church to worship. And I'm just thinking through it and how I'm curious as to how his faith could have remained so strong that he would have been willing to take such great risks to preserve that.
Yeah, I know. I think it's an excellent testimony of Esther's courage and bravery, Mordecai's faith and trust. I mean, he believes that there's going to be deliverance and rest for the people. He doesn't know how, but he trusts. And they fast, and they encourage others to fast because they have that trust and dependence on God. And it is amazing because they're in a godless culture. They're in a wicked. Atheism is state-sponsored, right? I mean, and all of this wretched environment is what they're thrown into.
And I think how when we weren't gathering for those few weeks as a church because during COVID, how difficult, and that was just a matter of a few weeks. This was
Yeah.
a whole lot worse.
Yeah. Yeah, because no land, no army, no temple, no sacrifices, no public worship. It kind of like that's a dimension of life that they're missing for encouragement and to keep steady. Anything else? Yeah, Becca.
I greatly appreciated how you did pull together some of the historical evidence of his actions to really flesh out his character, because it definitely makes the actions of some of the other characters in the story much more understandable and tangible to grasp, like why Esther was so afraid to go see her very irrational, wrathful husband.
Yeah, I think so too. Because when I read chapter 4 and you say, well, why is Esther scared to see her husband? I mean, certainly she's got looks going for her. Can't she just go in there and dazzle her husband, right? But you paint the colorful picture when you see what kind of irrational beast this guy is. Yeah. Yeah, I think that is helpful too. Yeah, Grant, were you gonna say?
Yeah, you had asked, in light of knowing his defeat, what kind of things that shows. And initially I thought, well, it shows that his arrogance is even more unwarranted than it should have been. But like you brought it back to Psalm 2, I mean, regardless of if he was defeated, his own arrogance and ego and his power is unwarranted, regardless of if he won or lose. If you're confident in your own power, like Psalm 2 says, and I like Isaiah 40 that says all of the nations, they're like a drop of condensation on a bucket. They're like the dust on the scales. They're nothing, and there's compared to his power. But the defeat just shows even more so. It's his arrogance is definitely unwarranted arrogance in his power.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's helpful for us to maintain an eternal perspective. And so I think it's important for us to read our Bibles from the future. Maybe even read current events from the future. Remind yourself of Psalm 2. Remind yourself of Revelation 18. Remind yourself of the great reversal, right? Isn't it Jesus who said to Martha, I'm the resurrection and the life? Even if someone dies, they live. That is the great reversal. Whoever lives and believes in me will live forever, even if they die. They can't die. They live forever. The great reversal. We need to live life with that kind of perspective. Well, how about something else? Anything else?
I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what resources you use to look into the historical background of, I guess, any book, or maybe it's dependent upon the book or passage.
Yeah, this one's actually kind of interesting because I've got a pretty decent set of resources that I've pulled from here. What's interesting about Esther is that it takes place around the time of Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. So anybody who's done some historical research or background in those books and have written some maybe historical commentaries on them, the information's quite plentiful because you can go to Ezra or Nehemiah or Daniel and get some of this information. You don't even need like an Esther type book. And I found that the Esther resources are kind of light. It's weird, because you guys might be surprised. You guys probably don't care, but John Calvin, for example, never wrote a commentary to Esther. All the books of the Bible, except for Revelation and Esther. Martin Luther didn't even think that Esther should be in the canon because God's name isn't mentioned. And it seems a little overly ethnically Jewish in his opinion. And so, some people view that, this isn't worth writing commentary resources on. But that's kind of a loss because we're learning a lot, right? So Esther seems to be a little bit lighter on the major commentary list. But so I've relied on resources from Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah as well. Sorry to answer so long, but yeah, I keep my active study on this at probably about 8 or 9 books. So actually, when we gather, my notes are like a blender mush of these 8 or 9 studies that I do. Sorry if it's like all over the place. Hopefully it comes out to God's glory. Makes sense. Dan, what are you going to say?
Oh, it's always fun when you look at the Old Testament and you see, you mentioned Harris and how you can see, I was reading it prior, reading through Esther, and literally that's kind of what is happening today. Similar.
Mm-hmm.
To the king. We have this failure, essentially lifelong failure, that's just being propped up and boasted in front of us. But so often we can see, how you say to read the Old Testament from the future, especially this book.
Mm-hmm.
It's always kind of cool to see how, just to be able to mesh them together, especially when it's something we're experiencing today.
I completely agree. Yeah.
So.
And I'm so glad you brought this up because let's not distance ourselves from the relevance of the message. This has applicability to us today. How are we to live when immersed in a godless culture, filled with confusion and uncertainty and fear? When it appears that God is absent? I don't know about you, but I haven't seen any Exodonius-style lightning bolts coming my way. So it's the invisible power and hand of God that's orchestrating things to bless his people and judge his enemies. And so, yeah, we'll be trying to make that type of impression as we go through. We can relate to the same message. All right, anything else, guys? All right, well, when you come back, we'll actually pick it up in verse 9, and we'll go to the end of the chapter, okay? So be studying that for your home worship, verse 9 to the end, and we'll look at that next week. Let's pray. Lord, we are grateful that you have given us the book of Esther. We're grateful that we see through history that the power is in your hand, that you are always active in your providence, and it is your sovereign control by which everything must be conformed. Help us to remember that you will always punish your enemies, and at the same time you will certainly always deliver your people by the sovereign power and control, ultimately through Jesus Christ. May we rely on this and have our faith increased. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.